Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. You have not entered any numbers. Please re-enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
At this point to see what the outcome of these other steps are.
Okay. I was curious after that was set aside.
Yeah, nothing else has happened at this point until we identify properties and figure out what the.
I'm sorry.
Review of panelists.
I'm a little-
You're able to.
Frazzled. It feels like a frazzled. Yes.
Okay, I think we have everybody.
Great. Good morning and welcome to the Coordinated Houseless Response Office meeting for the month of September. Took me a second to remember what month we're in. I guess we'll start today by introducing all of ourselves in the room. I'll start. Megan Perkins, I'm a Bend City Councilor.
Kat Zwicker, Redmond City Councilor.
Daniel Richer, Mayor of Lapine.
Michelle Cross, working with Mountain View Community Development on the RV park.
Rick Russell, Executive Director at Mountain View Community Development.
Chris Ogren, Houseless Response Analyst with the Coordinated Houseless Response Office.
Nick Lilac, County Administrator.
William
Bailey, Patrol Captain, County Sheriff's Office.
Nikki Durding, City of Bend.
Eric Nelson, Homeless Leadership Coalition.
Then to our Zoom folks,
Jeff Wolfschlager, City Manager, City of Lapine.
And Andrea Blum, City of Sisters.
Patty, can you hear us? I'm gonna promote them. I think that's Tammy.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Patty Adaris on the road.
Okay, Patty, here we gotcha.
Patty might be in and out, so should we?
Could probably mute her.
There is a fair amount of background noise. Has been a hard time pulling up. There she is. Sorry for the clunkiness this morning. Okay, Tammy, you can talk. She's there. She's the
Okay.
2233 number.
Okay, great. We'll just assume that Patty's not in good service right now. So today we are going to be, just to go over the agenda, we're going to be approving the minutes, talking about the next steps of the COIC transition and the IGA. Then we are going to move on to public agency roundtable planning, do some community updates, which is a new part of the agenda, which is basically all of us talking about what's going on in our community in terms of homelessness or houselessness. And do a COC annual competition update, a provider update from Mountain View, and finish up with some public comment. So first on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Does anybody have any concerns or edits to the minutes?
And I did just want to call out as well that we added the report from Kevin Dahlgren and the contract to the minutes as those were shared last month in the public record.
Okay,
I move to approve the minutes.
I second that.
all right. Been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect.
All right. Next, if Tammy is in an okay spot traveling, Tammy, do you feel comfortable in terms of your service being
Yes.
able? Okay, great.
Yep. Sorry that I'm not with you in person, but thank you so much. Would like to report out that the COIC board had an opportunity to review sort of an overview of what we're hoping to accomplish through an intergovernmental agreement. I think there's been some discussion about whether or not an IGA that you currently have as the CHRO board is the right mechanism to tie COIC to the organization and the work that you're hoping for us to do. And so just a slight change would be that we would be noted in your IGA, but your IGA would likely remain tying the parties together that keep it very aligned with House Bill 4123. And so we are in discussions with Deschutes County, and so that COIC would be more of a contractor and have an MOU for a scope of work that we are required to assist you in accomplishing. And so that's a slight variation, but really the tenets of all of it remain the same. And our board is really encouraged by this alignment and our ability for our team to be able to help support the work of the CHRO. And we also see that this is a nice tie-in to the work that we intend to be doing on behalf of the region, which will be establishing a regional plan that your strategic plan will fit nicely into. And then also standing up the Regional Housing Council, which allows us as a region to have the voice from all of the Tri-County and the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs to be able to talk about what they're doing and then how that might influence or impact in a good way the work that the CHRO office is doing too. So I'll pause there for a moment. I know that there have been a lot of discussions going on. We've had a conversation with the administrators to also talk about what this looks like in terms of changing from an IGA to an MOU or contract type of agreement. But do we have any questions, or is there anything, Chair, that you'd like me to add to that?
Any thoughts?
So Tammy, this is Counselor Swicker, just for confirmation, so we would retain basically the IGA we have, note the involvement of COIC, and then that one piece just for COIC would then become an MOU, work specific to the task. Are we gonna do a start stop on that, or is this something that would be in perpetuity? I'm just curious about if that memorandum of understanding would have some sort of timeline to it.
Oh, you bet. So great question. So the difference really is that as we started to go through the components of the IGA, they really are aligned and set within House Bill 4123, of which COIC is not a party. So we were actually adding COIC to the legislative intent, which felt a little bit wonkish. And so, because really what you're asking us to do is provide a service. You're asking us to support the efforts that House Bill 4123 affords the joint office. And so it is cleaner for us to be really, we are a contractor. If CHRO were not to, maybe there was something that didn't, wasn't able to happen. I don't have a good example because I think we will all crush it. But it really is that we are providing a service to you as members of the CHRO. We're not necessarily jumping in on the legislation and saying we are now part of the joint office. We are a partner of the joint office, but we are not an entity to the IGA that really ties you into the legislation. And so, yes, there is a check-in point. We were looking at a check-in for August of 2024 or around that time frame. And that is not a stop, that's a check-in. And if there's anything that needs to be refined, obviously we are going to have far more check-ins in between now and then. But we want to have an opportunity to say, is this working? Yeah, both for you and for us. That allows us to be able to refine what it is that we're doing. And really, we are intending to be your partner for as long as you need us to be.
Okay, thank you.
Tammy, how does this in any way affect sort of staffing? And do you have any thoughts on moving forward in that arena?
Excellent tee up. That's my next point that I wanted to make, so thank you. We are, of course, there's some legalese that needs to happen in any MOU, IGA, or contract, and so we are not letting that stall us out on the staffing. And so we are currently, when I say we, it's the administrators and then COIC. We are talking about how we will structure the staffing. We are hoping to be able to blend some of the staffing to be able to leverage some of the other housing work that is going on in that would be, supporting HLC, supporting some of the advisory work that's already going on. So we are looking at that structure, and then we've already drafted up job descriptions to be able to outline what that looks like. And then that would be part of the contract, of course, of the funding that would come to COIC to be able to bring on that staff. We've been in close communication with Chris Ogren. Of course, he is I'm not sure if he's wearing his superhero cape today, but he is the superhero right now. And so, we've been in close communication, so there are no surprises there too. But we intend to have something, presented or on the street, I guess, as you would say, maybe using air quotes, but soon, so that we can have an opportunity to begin the hiring process and develop the structure that you will need to accomplish your goals.
And at what point do you think we would start integrating the bylaws discussion back in?
Was that a question to me? I'm sorry.
I mean, or Chris, or.
I don't know that this would stall that out. I think that the bylaws could go forward. I think there is a language question from some of the legal members that has to do with the IGA that was possibly going to be brought forward today. And so I believe that's the reason that that might have been, it has to do with who actually will be the legal counsel, and I'm using air quotes, but sort of supporting the CHRO. And we're trying to figure out examples of when that might occur and then how that actually would play out. What's the best structure? So it's not a challenge, it's just clarification. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but the bylaws, I don't think that there's any reason that you couldn't go forward with those unless Chris, our superhero today, has a reason that gives him pause.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we could move forward. There were a few touching points that I think staff needed to look through one more time, but I think we're prepared to bring those forward in October.
Great. Anybody else
Good
have
morning,
anything
it's
else?
Commissioner Adair. It's Commissioner Adair, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, my question is, Chris, are you still going to be split then, 50-50? Having determined?
That's a great question. It sounds like I might be transitioning over to COIC full-time, but obviously still supporting the coordinated office as I have been, and hopefully more as COIC is able to hire on additional staff.
Well, I do appreciate having you, and but I want to make sure we pay our fair share, right?
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I'm definitely still sticking around. You're not losing me, don't worry.
Thank you.
You bet.
Tammy and
Chair
Chris.
Perkins, if I may.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention that ultimately Chris would be your point person, and we would also have someone who is working alongside Chris as well. And then we do, we'd have some crossover. We will have someone who is in an analyst position very similar to Chris, but working on all things other housing and unhoused related. And that will tie in nicely with the CHRO. And so that will allow us to have an opportunity to, in case Chris is out on vacation or the other person is out, some cross-pollination of those positions. And that way they know what's going on in the other rooms where we're talking about the unhoused crisis or other opportunities for grant funding or whatnot. And then we do intend that there would be a support person supporting those individuals too. So we're really looking at a way of developing this as a network of alignment to really be strategic about how we're addressing all of the opportunities on the horizon for us.
Well, it's a little off topic, but such exciting news I wondered if maybe Chris and or Tammy, if you could share the information about the HUD grant yesterday.
Yeah, Tammy, do you want to take the lead?
I don't, because you were the one who was in the saddle. I really was just fluff. You go right ahead.
Will do. So we found out, COIC found out late last week that the Homeless Leadership Coalition, our regional continuum of care, was selected for a really super competitive grant. 1 in 16 communities across the country this year was awarded, and it's called the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, the YHDP. And basically what happens is HUD selects these communities and kind of takes them under their wing going forward for a recurring grant that's specifically focused on youth and provides a bunch of technical assistance and support to like really help those communities lift up the youth population. And so they really center like youth with lived experience in the work. They come up with a plan on how they're going to address homelessness. And so it's a huge deal for our continuum. Like people in the federal government and stuff are reaching out to us over the past few days, congratulating us. And so it's a huge deal for the Homeless Leadership Coalition. And I think really just an acknowledgement on the federal side of all the great work that Central Oregon service providers and local governments have been doing to kind of work together to address this. And so the annual amount that we should be receiving it's just under $1 million, like $953,000, which is more than we get each year for all homelessness on the annual competition. So it's a really, really big deal and hopefully has a really big impact on youth homelessness in Central Oregon.
Yes.
Excellent. If I might just underscore, we were one of 16 in the United States, the only recipient in Region 10, and there are only 4 recipients total west of the Mississippi. So this is a really big deal and a recognition of the great work, as Chris said, that's going on in our region and puts us on the federal map of innovative and not afraid to try things. So great job.
Awesome. And with that,
With that,
let's jump into the
Oh,
public.
wait.
Oh, go ahead.
I think she also has one more thing.
Oh.
to talk about HLC.
Oh, perfect. Tammy, do you want to talk about the HLC and neighbor impact as well?
The counter request from the CIC board.
I'm happy to, you bet. So there is a request to complement the current composition of the CHRO board with a member of the Homeless Leadership Coalition representing our continuum of care. And that's of course, the regional perspective that the CHRO work ties directly into. In addition to Neighbor Impact, which is not only our community action agency, but they are also the partner that is tapped in taking the lead on much of the prevention side as well as the data side. And so in a number of the conversations around the CHRO table, there have been talks about the point in time count or talks about data that you want, or just some of the pieces that the CHRO office, because you are just one county with the cities, there is the recognition that it would enhance the discussion to be able to speak in real time about what data is available, how quickly you would actually have a person at the table to be able to say, I can, yes, we can get that right away, or here's actually the data that gives you more of what it is that you're looking for, or, that is a continuum of care piece where here's the reason that we maybe want to change the point in time count, and here's how that might impact the work of the CHRO. Those are probably terrible examples, but the request is that they're not, it's not that they are voting members, that really is up to you, but there is the request that those individuals have an opportunity to help inform the conversation at a level that's a little bit more than maybe sitting in the audience and being called on to provide some input. It's a way of also tying your work into the other work that's going on so that we don't have duplication and we don't lose any of that synergy about working together.
about that.
So before I speak on that, I'm gonna say one thing very clearly. I sit on the board of Neighbor Impact, so I probably shouldn't engage in conversations about bringing them into this board because I would be biased. So I'll let you guys have that discussion around me.
Okay, what do you think?
I
Voting,
think
non-voting?
that
good idea?
having outside impact or, information impacts our decisions a lot, so I don't see any problem with that, if you can get direct data from somebody.
Yeah. How about our Zoom members? What are your thoughts?
I don't have any problem with having Neighbor Impact there. I think they'd be a great asset, and it would undoubtedly be able to speed up some of the conversations we have, because we wouldn't have to ask for information and then wait a week, or and it would bring forward the importance of that organization. So I think that that's a good idea.
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments. Quite often, neighbor impact with respect to Lapine is at the forefront of a lot of concerns that are reflected by the conversations we're having here. And so I certainly support that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that it's a good idea. I don't think a voting membership on the board makes sense, but I think in a sort of, I guess, what do you call them, ex officio, or I don't know what the official
Advisory
advice.
capacity.
Yeah, I think that would be a member of the board, but a non-voting member of the board. That was my personal.
Yeah, and I think that's what the CYC board is hoping for as well.
Awesome. Great. Do
Yes,
we need
and
to?
we are not self-selecting. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, is that something that we would need to vote on today, or is that just a future?
I think that's something we could include in the bylaws and vote on
Okay.
next month, if that
Okay.
sounds okay.
Does that sound okay to you,
If
Tammy?
I may, Chair? Yes, sorry, I can't see you, so the body language, my apologies if I'm stepping on you. The board is not determining or directing who that would be. I mean, clearly that's at your discretion, but, and yes, the bylaws is just fine. So, thank you.
All right. Anything else on this topic?
I had a question. Before we move off from this discussion, we once again put in this agreement that we would be funding it for up to 5 years or for at least 5 years. And we haven't really had a full discussion about how we're going to fund that. When is that discussion going to take place?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, I think that the sustainable funding piece is probably the next step after we complete this transition to COIC. Yeah, I mean, that'd be my thought.
Yeah, and I'm just throwing out some ideas, you know, as we talk about like the, you know, the term of the contract and like the annual check-in in August, like I don't know if we're making a 5-year commitment with COIC yet, or if it's a 1-year commitment with like optional extensions. Like I don't know how that agreement will be formalized, but there could be, you know, I think once the transition's happened, we'll have some opportunity to apply for grants and look for things outside of just like city and county coffers. And then I think it would be great to have some commitments if the funding can't be sourced through the state of the feds, that it would be supported locally, but just some ideas.
Yeah, I'll just say, with Deschutes County, we met with our lobbyist, Doug Riggs, a couple of days ago, and we talked about the importance of attempting to secure funding in the short session for years 3 to 5. The other piece, as we provided the update on the budget I think it was last month, that's still about 80% of our funding is still available. So that will certainly carry us into year 3, which is great. And we're also having the conversations with our board about ongoing funding. But hopefully we'll learn more with the short session, and great that we have a head start on the year 3 already.
I also know from conversations with Matt, the senior housing staff for Governor Kotek, that they are committed to ensuring that these coordinated offices are a success, and commitment usually means committed to see funding in the future. So I think that we can't count on it, but I think that there is definitely, there will be a state component to future funding.
Okay, good to hear.
All right, let's move on to item number 4.
Excuse me, it's Commissioner Dare. Do we have a treasurer's balance today? Is Eric there? Can you give us our balance?
Balance, like the fund balance.
Oh, Eric is not here today. I can certainly get that for another update and share that with everybody from our finance office.
I doubt it's far off.
It's not, yeah. In fact, last month, I think, it's still about 800,000. Last month, I can't remember the number.
It was 815 last month, plus or minus the money from COIC.
From COIC, exactly. So
yeah, we're definitely still in the 800s.
That's still the ballpark, yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Okay, moving on.
Number 4. Chris, will you kick us off with this?
Yes. Okay, so we've got 3 things to talk about updates for the public agency roundtable planning. So the first is just kind of an update. So we've been meeting every 2 weeks, this group as a refresher. So there was this COVID-19 kind of tri-county executive committee that had met monthly on Fridays throughout the pandemic. That was kind of ratcheting down, but it had all of the partners that the CHRO board was hoping to include in this public agency roundtable. So we sent some staff there. We talked about the idea, folks there were supportive, so they created a subcommittee. And that subcommittee has been meeting every 2 weeks. It has county staff, city, the city of Redmond has been participating as well, along with Forest Service, state parks, BLM. So really a multidisciplinary group. And we're focusing on putting together a list of potential properties to be considered in this eventual public agency roundtable. And so where we were in the last meeting was kind of an assessment of the list and what work needed to be done to further refine it so that it's ready to go public. We kind of all agreed that more staff with really specific and relevant knowledge need to take a comb through the list and go out and check the properties out, right? And so we're talking about creating a subcommittee of that group, which I'll bring up momentarily. But in the interim, we're hoping that while staff is focused on further refining that list, that we can agree on some values and criteria and maybe talk about like the public engagement. So we want to make sure that we're still moving this process forward with the CHRO board while this simultaneous work is happening in a subcommittee. And so acknowledging that past attempts at citing places to put folks or have them be able to live where they're allowed to has been fraught with challenges, right? Like the city of Bend has encountered difficulties trying to cite places as well as Redmond. Like I know that Oasis Village had an article in the paper just the other day. And so I think we can all acknowledge that the community is really interested and has a vested interest in how the community decides where folks are going to go. And so we thought that it would be good to be really transparent with folks about the types of criteria that are going to be reviewed, the values that are going into this so that everybody's on the same page and kind of knows what the goal is. And then we're going to follow that up with a commitment to a public process, just being really transparent to make sure that we get this thing right. And so looking over the values and criteria, these are recommendations that came out of the subcommittee. And so we kind of talked through it, and the top 3 themes were agreed upon by the group. And then the additional criteria were recommendations from the chair and vice chair of the CHRO board as we brought this before them. So first and foremost is ensuring a comprehensive and broad community engagement process. So creating opportunities to hear from residents and neighbors, not trying to just force something through, leveraging existing relationships of trust to access input into design. So like getting community feedback on what will work and what might not. And then just sharing information and opportunities. So not trying to do this behind closed doors. We want to assure safety and quality of life for all. So that's the residents of the proposed area, that's the neighbors, that's safe access and egress from the site for both the folks that would be living there and like emergency services personnel that may have to come in, proximity to critical amenities and services. So we're not putting folks 10 miles out of town in the woods. And then the physical environments in which safety threats might be reasonably mitigated. So like a wall or a fence or something like that. And then really like respect and protecting important partnerships and continuing to collaborate. So not leaving partners in isolation, doing this together. It's not one group's responsibility to take care of this. We're doing this together, operating under shared commitments and following up with those. And then just collaboration and coordination on communications. So those are like what the group suggested. And then also looking at, multiple options and project scaling appropriately. So not coming to the board with, hey, this is what we think you should do, saying, here's all the different options to solve the problem. What do you guys want to pick? And having a community conversation about that. And then also considering the feasibility, acknowledging that we're looking for progress, not perfection. And so I think we need to focus on what's possible in the near term versus trying to take on a multi-year project that isn't going to have the impact that we need right now. So that was a lot. I'm going to stop talking. Do you have any feedback or things you want to add or things you might want to remove, or what are folks thinking about these?
What do you all think?
These are very good, I think, starting points, but when we're ensuring a broad and comprehensive community engagement, define that for me.
Yeah, I think.
Because what I think is comprehensive, obviously we'll use Oasis Village is not, and it's been well televised and spoken about for the past 18 months, and yet to people, until it's present and in their line of sight, it obviously didn't matter until that moment. So
Yes.
how do we work with that?
And I definitely think it's a conversation to have, right? I think we could approach that a few different ways, but I think like first and foremost, the goal, so the subcommittee is gonna hopefully provide the board with a, decide what the best options are. And so I think that some of these robust community feedback processes could be like having an open house to talk about some of the characteristics of the sites that are like maybe finalists, right? And talking through it and hearing questions and like letting folks come and tell us what they think about it. Because really, at the end of the day, I think the community, at least from what I've seen, the community gets really frustrated when they don't have an opportunity to provide feedback and suggestions, right? And so I think that we need to do that maybe once, maybe twice, maybe a consultant helps facilitate something like that. We could put up a web page, or we could make the CHRO webpage more robust to kind of highlight some of these things. Yeah, but it's not going to be easy, and it will cost money, I guess, is some things that we should just call out. It'll take a little bit of time.
I think the key thing is the word opportunities, create opportunities.
Yeah.
You can't make people pay attention, but you also can't let every project be railroaded,
Exactly.
because there's always going to be someone who's unhappy. I mean, it's just, that's just the way that but as long as you're listening to people and taking their concerns into account, I think that's what really matters. And I think the other thing, and probably a lesson that we learned from in Bend as well, is the adequate time for involvement.
Yep.
A lot of times this kind of, okay, you got to, here's what we're doing, and there's not enough time, and so people get a little defensive because they think we're just trying to kind of just push something through secretly. So I think those are some key phrases in there.
And one other thing to add too is like, I think, right, I mean, as the community is watching us talk about this, I'm sure there's like some feelings and maybe some apprehension. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to say, look, this is what we're committing to. These are our values as we go through this process, so that we're being really transparent with the community and saying, we're committing, the CHRO board is committing to these specific things, right? We're going to be transparent. We're going to share information before it's happening. We're going to give adequate time for feedback. We're not going to just put something up next to somebody's house. And well, yeah. So I think this is just an opportunity for you to, speak to the community and tell them what you think is important for you.
I also think the additional criteria at the bottom are really important, because there's no point in saying, here, we're going to put 300 people in a field. We need to make sure that we're doing diverse sites, for diverse needs, for our houseless population. And also just not assuming that just because there is a plot of land that can be surplused or whatever, that it's a good location for. So I think those are two key criteria at the end. Any thoughts from anybody else? Oh, Andrea has her hand up.
Yes. I'm trying to decide how what we just went through in Sisters applies to this criteria. And unfortunately, the project that came to Sisters, the permission for it came through a House bill that did not require community engagement. So I don't know how we deal with projects that are really not under our control because they come through some other avenue. The project that was approved in Sisters by the MAC committee, the funding for the purchase of a building and staffing, all they had to do was through a House bill was to meet certain criteria that did not, like I said, did not include community engagement. And so at the last minute, sort of, we pushed that community engagement piece before we considered approving the application. And it was a nightmare because people said, well, the project has already been approved by the MAC committee. The COIC has already approved the funding and the staffing. And so what we're saying, how does that even have any impact on this project? And they felt like the whole thing had been done behind the community's back without their knowledge. And so I don't know how many other communities are going to have a project come forward in this fashion, but if nothing else, I can say that these values are the most important piece of the whole decision-making process, because without this huge upfront community engagement participation, there's just no way you're going to get communities that are going to agree to a project that goes around in an alternate fashion, like the one that was proposed in Sisters.
And Councillor Blum, is there anything like from the process in Sisters that you think is missing from this slide? Is there anything that you learned from that process that you'd like to add to this?
Well, if we had actually gone through a community engagement process from the beginning, I would have more background on how much it would or would not help. I just know that it's essential, and it will allow for some trust. And that's what this project in Sisters didn't have, is the people in the community did not trust that what the applicant was saying was true.
Yeah.
They did not believe, they thought, oh, well, once you get the application approval from the city, then you're just going to go and do whatever you want to do because you don't care what the community thinks. And so that trust is something that has to be built from the very beginning, so that people can say, okay, this is something that I know about. I know what the parameters are. I know what the long-term goals are. I know what it's going to look like. I know what it's going to feel like. I know, and I can trust that because I've seen other projects in other places and they've done what they said they were going to do, or there were safeguards in effect that if it went off the rails, it could be pulled back. All of those things have to be in place before we can move the lever to the side of people being willing to trust us that we will do what we say we will do.
Yeah, that's really important.
I think that is true.
So yeah, one thing that Councillor Blum just said that I don't know if it's worth including, but like some form of, you know, like maintaining that public trust is really important, right? And letting the community know that we're going to do what we said we're going to do at the beginning. And so I wonder if there's any interest in like adding some check-in or like reflection point to like make sure that things are operating as intended. If that's like a value or a criteria, like a community check-in or something.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously our guest here today can speak to this as well. Is one of the things that was so effective with Central Oregon Villages, who also came in through the House bill, right, Vicki? Yeah, is that they met with basically every single neighbor around that church and put together a good neighbor agreement.
Yeah.
And I think that and because of that, there have been, you know, no issues. I mean, of course there've been tiny ones, but I mean, they built that trust. And so I think they maintain that trust and they know that there was a,
Yeah.
you know, and I think it's the same thing with a lot of our shelters, that the most effective relationships have been when they've really just had that, you know, like, hey, here's what we want from you, here's what you want from us, you know, and so yeah, kind of maybe put that in there and to continue that two-way conversation. I think is really important.
Yes, and I agree that you can actually put in a good neighbor agreement or in the contract that within, like, say, 1 year, that there will be a check-in with the community to see what the problems have been, what the, and because what we found too is that in previous situations where the cold weather shelter had some problems, they hadn't taken those problems to the cold weather shelter people. They brought them to the city. And so some of the cold weather shelter people weren't even aware that they were a problem, but so having an annual check-in or something, I think is very important.
It's Commissioner Adair. Honestly, when we did the safe parking in Redmond, we did a 90-day check-in. I think waiting a whole year is way too long. And just so you all are aware, the Ben Bulletin already has a list of all the properties. They've already got that information. So transparency, I think, is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, and acknowledging that we're just a little late on the agenda, I'm gonna move on. And so the next slide is the public engagement commitment. So this is just kind of in line with these values and criteria. So the statement, ensuring comprehensive and broad community engagement. The board would want to create opportunities to hear from potential residents of the sites, also neighbors of the projects in development. They'd want to leverage existing relationships of trust, share information and opportunities for engagement openly and with adequate time for involvement. So if you have any feedback, let me know. And then finally, just a quick update on this technical subcommittee and the work product that we're hoping to put together for you. So acknowledging that we've continued to push this back, but we're really hoping that through October, this technical committee, the folks on the bulleted list are the kinds of folks that we're hoping would be in the technical committee. And we're really hoping to kind of break that list of properties into 3 tiers. Developable now, developable with some improvements, and fatal flaws, like take it off the list, not for consideration. And we're hoping that this technical committee is able to go and check out the sites in tiers 1 and hopefully 2, depending on how many are there, and talk about, provide a summary of each property, talking about things like stormwater runoff, slope, entrance and egress, just getting there and actually deciding whether or not it's a good site based on more than just pictures. And then providing a recommendation based on what was shared last month, kind of all the different options we have on what that site is best suited for, right? So maybe one site would be best suited for safe parking, whereas another might be a managed camp or a shelter or something like that. And so we're hoping to do that through October and bring that to you either in late October or in November to share. So that's kind of the update on the process there.
Thanks, Chris.
You bet.
And I wanted to add too that some of the folks that could be on this technical committee could include some suggestions with community engagement because they've had success in that as well.
Absolutely.
So that's going to be part of what they'll bring to you back.
Great.
Okay.
All right, we're a little behind. So community updates, this is just to go around for the board members, give a couple minutes, anything going on in your community that you want to share so that we're all just sort of up to date. Who would like to go first? Can I call on you, Dan, or is that?
Sure.
Okay,
I mean, the Pine's kind of stable, I mean, we don't really have a large influx of homelessness. We have a certain amount of homelessness in relatively stable areas, we don't have a lot of people that are in town. They all come to town for services and then go back outside of town. I don't know what I could tell you other than that, because I haven't noticed anything within town changing. Maybe Jeff Wolschlager might have some input to that, but it's relatively stable. Now that the cold weather's coming in, it's going to take and dwindle a little bit, and the hardened homeless will stay there, but there'll be a little bit that'll go south.
What kind of services do you have in La Pine during the cold weather? Like, do you have cold weather shelter or anything?
We have a
like that?
warming center, we have community meals. We don't really have low or high barrier shelter, but we do provide regular meals, and we go out and deliver meals also.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would echo Mayor Richards' sentiments on that. It's very cyclical here in Lapine, given our topography, geography, and elevation. We're a bit higher than just about everybody else. And so when fall and winter come, there's sort of a natural application of the elements that seems to restrict the presence of people experiencing houselessness. I will say that the summer we did see a bit more foot traffic within the city limits. I think just given the problem we're all experiencing across the broader area, but the majority of those individuals do go out into federal lands generally in the evening hours, because we're surrounded, as most of you know, by BLM and US Forest Service land, and that brings a whole different layer of jurisdictional control or application thereof. So really, to highlight Mayor Richards' point, it's sort of an odd duck, because while we do see people seeking certain services in the community, especially given the county's mental health services at the south end of town here, they generally spend their actual evening hours and their sort of established domicile outside of the city limits.
We've been in the news, we're good.
Yes, I'd like to say, we all know what's going on.
We all know what's going on. Actually, just a quick update. Obviously, Oasis Village is the hot topic, but the utility crossways we worked on as we speak. There's a little offside road now when you go down to Pineville. All of the fencing has been completed and everybody is out of the RPZ with no conflict whatsoever.
Wow.
So that is a fabulous, good thing there. And we're just continuing to move forward. I believe groundbreaking for Oasis, but they're actually starting with the community home tiny houses in October.
Yeah, it's like early October, like the 4th or something like that.
So great.
So very exciting.
Very exciting.
Great. Yeah.
Andrea, do you have anything to share from Sisters? I mean,
Um,
you kind of addressed it, but.
Much like Lapine, our folks are in the forest, and we do have community groups that go out and check on people and pick up garbage that the people gather up and put in bags for them to come and pick up. They kind of have an agreement to do that. And they help get propane to people that need it. And we do have some meals that are served in the community that they can come in for. Pretty independent folks. I guess we did see a little bit of an uptick when Bend had scurried folks from the Hunnell Road area. So there was a few that came, but usually those folks don't make it through the winter. But but our issue was the recent shelter that was, the application was not approved by the city. Basically, they didn't meet the criteria in the application. The applicant did not. And so it did stir up much interest in the community that something needed to be done. And so we're very hopeful that many of the people who were opposed to this particular application will now work to come up with an alternative. That's one of the things we tried to get through to people is don't just say, we don't want this project, but we recognize that there needs to be something. You need to come up and help with what that might look like. And so there is going to be significant ongoing discussions about what is appropriate if this isn't. And so we'll see if that goes anywhere.
Patty, are you available to give a little update from the county? Sir. Or Nick?
Sure, I'm happy to. Several items very quickly. One is we're spending a lot of time right now on the IGAs to update those among the cities along with COIC. Also working on that with the state and what our agreement is there. That's piece number one. Piece number two, we're continuing to work on the Juniper Ridge remediation plan, providing a lot of support services to address the issues at Juniper Ridge without relocating, displacing people there, which is really, really critical. That's a big effort right now. In late August, the Board of Commissioners allocated $2 million for managed or supported camps, which we put aside. We haven't identified where that's going to go. So we're waiting for some of these other processes to play out to determine where we can best spend that money. I've already mentioned our legislative meeting that we had with Doug Riggs. Jeff mentioned the behavioral health services, mental health services that Hughes County provides in La Pine. One of the key issues that we have changed recently with that is we're actually providing an additional compensation for people to live and work in La Pine because it's a rural area. So it's more difficult actually than even in Bend. We had the conversations, but it's more expensive to live in Bend, but it's more challenging to attract people to rural areas. So we're paying people more to provide those services, to live in and work in the South County office. We are amending our code to reflect a new state law to allow rural residential property owners to site RVs on their properties, which could be utilized as another housing element. That's a big thing, and the board is currently considering that. We're going to be bringing our safe parking program to the board. I think it's going to be in October. That's primarily outside of city limits, but inside of urban growth boundaries as allowed by state law. And I think that's so we're working on a number of fronts, and of course continuing to support Oasis Village and others as we're able. So snapshot in the county.
Great, thank you. From Bend, just two, they're all kind of connected, the two bits of information I have, but last night we approved a contract to renovate our navigation center, which currently sleeps about 100 and provides extensive day services. It was an old retail store and the roof is leaking. It has no kitchen. It has a little break room, so they have to have their meals brought in every day from Family Kitchen, and it just was not meant to be a shelter in its current form. And so because of the fact that we do not want to lose all of those beds, there is a very, very complicated, I called it gymnastics process that is going to go on where all the day services are going to be moved elsewhere. They're going to lose about half of their beds. Half of the beds will go to the Franklin Street shelter. But the construction will go on from 7:30 to 5 every day, and the building will be completely shut down. And then at 5, it'll open for the other 50%. And the idea is that yes, this is going to take a lot longer, but then we won't be losing. That the last thing we want is to lose beds in our largest shelter. So that was quite a lot of work, and finding a contractor that could like do that and be okay with that system and having to work around people and things is really incredible. But the biggest worry and concern we have right now is over funding for both our project turnkey shelter on Franklin and our navigation center are that we need to have operations funding, and we are sending a letter to OHCS right now asking to please get us this navigation center and turnkey funding that we were promised that we would receive. We are basically floating the cost right now from the city until we get this funding. And so it's becoming, and we're able to do that because of really good fiscal management and planning on behalf of the city. But we need this funding to turn around so that we don't have to close, because that would mean about 150 to 200 people would be out of somewhere to stay. So that's where we're at with the city then.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Next up is the COC competition.
Yes. Eric, do you want to come up, maybe sit right here, one of those spots? Eric and I are going to tag team this one.
Generally resist being on camera, but I will make an exception. You want to start off?
You're starting off.
Okay, so this is a presentation about the annual NOFO. This is the continuum of care for Central Oregon that's led by the HLC. Every year we apply for federal funding through HUD. And there is a bit of a COC 101 course that just happened this week, and the recording can be made available, I think is made available to the board here, which gives good background about what a continuum of care is, what we do, what are our responsibilities. Here in Central Oregon, that's the Homeless Leadership Coalition. It is a meeting of service providers and interested parties in addressing homelessness here in the Central Oregon Tri-County plus the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. We use a collective impact model so that we are not being too, let's say, Bend-centric or Deschutes County-centric. It's meant to be regional. It's meant to be a collaborative response, not a dictatorial one. So there's a lot of going back and forth between members of the HLC so that everybody's voice is heard. I want to go to the next slide. I know the text is very small, but this is a snapshot of both the HLC board, which is by the governance charter, 11 to 15 members, with currently has open seats. Some of those folks up there are not going to be renewing their terms on the board, and we're constantly in a recruitment drive for both board and general membership. That happens annually in October, so we're currently in the process of doing that. I would encourage any interested parties to contact HLC and fill out an application to be a part of the general membership or the board. So this funding opportunity, it happens nationwide every year. We're competing with every other continuum of care for funding. We're currently getting just over $800,000. You heard Chris say earlier that the YHDP grant is more than our entire grant from HUD that we normally get. The reason for that is because this funding is not meant to be ongoing as it's currently being used for. With the exception of admin and HMIS, those other funding projects are meant to be seed funding so that communities can start to pick up those projects and continue them, you know, further, especially when in regards to things like permanent supportive housing.
And I just want to add too, yeah, so like the seed funding thing, right? Like it's hard for communities, like I think we've all seen, it's hard for communities to support a new idea. It's easy for them to support something that's already been proven as a proof of concept. So this is HUD basically saying, we'll provide the money for you guys to try something out. And then once it's established and it's working well, the goal, HUD's intent, is for the community to start to support that project, which would free up funding for new pilots. So it's kind of like the federal government stepping out and like taking some of maybe the negative press. But here locally, like this year's competition, we have 8 renewal projects. We don't have a single new project that ended up submitting an application. And so we're kind of in like misaligned with how HUD is intending the process to work. And that's not to say that it's bad, like we're funding a lot of really necessary programs, but it's a goal of the COC to find other funding to support those projects so that we can help foster program growth as well.
Well, and by virtue of it being competitive, that means that we're being graded on our application. One of the things that we're being graded on is, do we have any new programs? How well did we administer our previous programs? And the more competitive we can be in the application, the more money we might be awarded. And that means more programs that might be able to be seeded and then expanded upon. So we're really almost stagnating with the way that we're currently doing this by only doing renewal projects without getting more involvement from the county and city governments.
Yeah, and I would, and so like the use of this funding is super restrictive, and that's that's, I would say, the main reason why we're not seeing new applicants is applying for this money is really hard. Like federal grants, I've learned recently in the past few years, super complicated both in the application and then in the reporting and the expectations, and like the punishments are very hard, right? The feds are like, if you misuse the system, we'll kick you out for the rest of your life. It's like, oh, okay. So there's a housing first requirement with this funding, which means you can't require money to access a service, or you can't require somebody go through a program before they're put into housing. They have to fund low barrier programs. As I mentioned, there's a really high burden to apply. Like I would assume that it would take a nonprofit probably 40 to 80 hours to like design a program and then tell the federal government how it's going to work and what resources they need. And in a process like this, where it's not guaranteed that you're actually going to get funded, that's like some tough mental math for a nonprofit that's lean, you know. And then also required participation in coordinated entry and the homeless management information system. So like you need to be good with tracking your data and collaborating with other nonprofits as well. So definitely a high bar to get this funding.
Yeah, let's assume for the sake of argument that there was someone who put together a new project. We have to remember that this is a collaborative effort here. There are other service providers that are going to be in danger of losing their program. That includes permanent supportive housing. By definition, permanent supportive housing is serving folks who are chronically homeless and one of the household members, or likely more than one, have a disability. So that's why it's called permanent supportive housing. The idea is that they're not going to be able to transition, move on, as it were, to be self-sustaining. If there's a new project that is put forward in the NOFO process and you lose a permanent supportive housing, that's just a block of families or individuals who are no longer going to have a housing support. So that's what we're kind of talking about here.
It's tough, and that like prioritization and ranking process never feels great. You know.
Yeah.
And so just to add a little bit of context, so this funding supports the homeless management information system. So there's funding from this that supports HMIS. It also supports a position at Neighbor Impact that helps facilitate the coordinated entry meetings each week and run that whole system. So really integral to the way that the homeless response system works. And then in addition, this upcoming competition, so there's rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing beds. Rapid rehousing is basically paying rent for folks that can eventually become self-sustaining. And so this funding funds a portion of 25 rapid rehousing units, which have 43 beds. So it's just a portion, it's not all of them. And then 53 permanent supportive housing units and 72 beds. And I would also add that every recipient of the grant has to have a 25% match. So they have their own skin in the game as well. And so that's also to be included. So nearly $1 million to support like part of 111-ish beds between the two projects, just to add a little bit of context there. Go to the next one. And so the Homeless Leadership Coalition's role in this process is to share information, let nonprofits know, let providers know that this opportunity is available, and help them design programs, submit their applications. And then, so programs apply for this funding individually under the guise of the Homeless Leadership Coalition. So they say, we're in Central Oregon, we're applying for funding under this. Once the COC board has reviewed all project applications, they're ranked. And so in priority. So like this year, the HLC board decided that permanent supportive housing was the priority, which means all the permanent supportive housing projects went to the top, and some of the like supportive services only or rapid rehousing projects were ranked a little bit lower and may have some funding that's jeopardized.
Yeah, and then, well, you go back to that one.
Yeah.
And important to note, we also use an independent review team, of which you should be familiar with that. And it's not the COC board voting in like the void. We strive to go to great lengths in order to get as much input as possible And in order to kind of justify our decisions, that includes things like how might we braid other funding into support things like HMIS or coordinated entry, which is something that we really looked at pretty closely this year. So it's in the governance charter that the HLC board needs to choose their priorities for groups and projects every year, which we do, and we vote on that. And that's another opportunity for there to be public engagement by the CHRO board, for example.
And so just to give you a sense of the timeline really quick, so HUD, it's typically a 90-day process. Last year was a 60-day process, but they're like, it's coming, and then typically right after the 4th of July, they release it, and then it's 90 days to submit. And so since July 5th, the HLC has had a letter of intent deadline on August 11th. So this is service providers kind of telling the board that they're considering applying and that they have a program that they think will fit. And then 2 weeks later, they have to submit their full application, which outlines the way the program will work and how much money they'll need to support it. And then as Eric had mentioned, the HLC has a grants committee and an internal review team. And that group is specifically designed to mitigate any conflicts of interest. And through the week of August 23rd to 31st, that those two groups reviewed all the applications that came in, scored them based on a scoring matrix I put together, and then we ranked the projects and made a recommendation to the HLC board. The HLC board voted on September 1st to approve the recommendation of the grants committee. And then it's basically all hands on deck through September for the board members to take all of the individual projects, all their applications, and essentially weave them together and tell the federal government how we're going to operate a comprehensive homeless response system for the next year. So we take the permanent supportive housing, the rapid rehousing, HMIS, and then a bunch of other information that isn't included in these, like domestic violence provider data and how we're working with schools and youth providers and anything you could imagine, honestly, natural disasters, all these different things, put together this application and we submit it, and it will be live on the HLC's website on Monday. The culmination of 3 months of hard work from providers, the HLC board, the grants committee, and many others. And so I will let you all know when it's live. And if you're interested in reading over a 50+ page grant application on your Monday, you're absolutely welcome to.
And it is a reflection of, next slide. It is a reflection of the hard work of people who have full-time jobs and then are doing their grants committee work on top of that, reviewing projects on top of that. This is a breakdown of the rating and ranking table. I just want to kind of gloss through it real quick so we can get back on track for Mountain View. But you can see the breakdown of dollars there on the right. And then all the way on the left, you can see the rank that we assigned. You can see the HMIS and coordinated entry were ranked last. Like I said, we had a deep discussion about rating funding in order to support those aspects of what we do in the COC. We move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is just important to know. We do this every year. This is something that's supporting folks here and their housing every year, and we could do more. We could do more with more engagement, more involvement, more contribution from the community, from different agencies in the community. Rating funding is something that they always talk about because the federal government and the state government both feel the same way about this. They would love to give us money. They would love it more if we paid for our own stuff. So more collaborations needed, more involvement in grants committee starting earlier in May, not in June, will be helpful in order to get more projects. Finding ongoing funding for those projects so we can start new projects, so we can get ongoing funding for that and build the homeless response program here in Central Oregon. That would be the goal. But I don't want to take up too much more at the time. I know we're 5 minutes past.
Are there any questions before we move on? I know that was a ton of information and we were kind of tag teaming it. All good. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you. You're up next.
All right, well, thank you. I'm Rick Russell and I'm the Executive Director of Mountain View Community Development and also serve as pastor of Mountain View Fellowship. And
I'm Michelle Cross. I am currently working with Mountain View Community Development started with this feasibility project on this property east of Redmond and now moving into our RV park concept, so getting that thing built.
So just real briefly, we've hosted the winter shelter in Redmond for about 7 or 8 years in our building, and that's been a partnership with Shepherd's House, who staffed that. In December 21, we started safe parking in Redmond, and we are just on the verge of opening our 7th location. For that, we provide place for about 40 people right now. I think by the end of this year, that'll be closer to 60 or 65 people, and by the spring, that'll probably be, we think, closer to 80 because we have some anticipated new sites coming online as well. But housing is a bit of a ladder. It's not just binary, you have it or you don't. People don't typically just fall into homelessness with one step. It's a series of steps that people descend into. And so we want to help build a ladder with more rungs on it that provide opportunity for people to move up. And so as we move from unauthorized encampments to low barrier shelter, things like safe parking or Oasis Village or a Second Street shelter or any of those other shelter operations, we'd like to consider something that's another rung up the ladder. And that is an RV park that would be a for rent model, but subsidized still, and still providing supports for people and case management help to continue to help them rise up to greater self-sufficiency and greater stability. In our program in safe parking, about half of the participants, the households that are represented, have someone who's working. These are folks who go to work every day. Nearly all of our participants, I can think of only one exception, have some level of income each month. None of our participants can afford market rate rent. And all of our participants have a case manager who's helping them navigate subsidized housing lists or other housing opportunities. So can we create something that folks can afford and can buy in and have some skin in the game as well and begin to move up? So the city of Redmond gave us some funds back in the spring to do a feasibility study, and as Michelle mentioned, and this slide deck that you see as a result of that. Could you go to slide 6? Or well, it's page 6. I don't know if that corresponds to the slide or not. But, one more, right there. That's great. So just in development of this, we looked at several other models in person in Salem, in Eugene, in Portland, and then found the best proof of concept for this work in Austin, Texas, where we've done made a couple of trips and done some training with them, and are encouraged by the potential for what could happen in Redmond and in Central Oregon. So, Michelle, do you want to go through this?
Yeah, so kind of to give you an overview of what we've seen in Texas, it's definitely a public-private partnership. They initially were entirely privately funded and now are kind of bringing in some of these public funds, but it is a for rent model. It's subsidized. They're serving the chronically homeless population, but all of them have income and are able to pay. The rents are lower. They're typically like between the $300 and $500 range. And what we're seeing is they're living, initially it was entirely RVs. So people are bringing in their own RVs, or the community was donating RVs. And over time they have slowly begun to integrate park model RVs. So more like your tiny home type structure. And
could you go to slide 9, Chris? Just an image of that, what that looks like. So you will see both in that top picture, both RVs along with stick-built structures side by side. So the ability to convert each one of those sites, because utilities have been subbed in, gradually over time you can transition from transitional short-term shelter to even potentially creating permanent supportive shelter options, one unit at a time. Sorry to pick up.
so in the concept that we're developing, we have roughly 60 sites on this about 9-acre property east of town, adjacent to Oasis Village. Our thought initially is that these are a maximum of 1 year. So at first of all, we have entirely RVs. The case management services are really trying to move people up and out into more permanent housing. There are as it mentions, like full wraparound services, case management, on-site property management. There is, you know, in our we're currently working with 10 Over Studio for the design and landscape design, and there's a heavy emphasis placed on this really master plan community where there's a heavy emphasis on landscape and creating a sense of home, and also how are we intentionally designing it to be phased into if there is permanent housing on this at some point. How do we kind of design wisely so that we can, you know, create a long-term project here. The target demographic, it's not only the currently like chronically homeless, but also those who are in more of like a safe parking option or at risk of, so it can also be a transitional step from Oasis or safe parking.
There we go. So can you go back to 9? So you'll see that at the back side of this packet, you'll see the other projects that we looked at, the construction costs as well as the operating costs. We, right now, our estimate for build out is it's gonna be right around 4 million. And operating is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 1.75 per year. We are right now at the beginning of a relationship with Pacific Source that we think can fund operations substantially, not entirely, but substantially, we believe, and we're going to be taking that for a test drive here this fall. We're very excited about that. But the biggest obstacle for us are the capital costs, the site improvement costs, getting to that $4 million figure. Really grateful for the county approving $200,000 of ARPA funds a month or two ago. And that's really going to help us continue with architecture and planning. But that's our big obstacle at the moment. What's unique about this property is you've got it's going to be side by side with Oasis Village. So you've got 12 acres already committed by the county, and then there's more county property inside the urban growth boundary just to the north. And so this is a project that is successful, can phase beyond just 9.5 acres and can continue to grow. And so as we've met with the county board, and Commissioner Dare can speak to this as well, one of our requests has been that they would really hold and reserve that land immediately to the north, because if there is success here, we'd like to see this continue to phase out. And that kind of land inside the urban growth boundary just doesn't really exist anywhere else in our county. And so there's a really unique opportunity on this property. It has universal support from all the neighbors within 4.5 miles. And that's a unique opportunity that I think we can seize. And so we're pretty excited about this project, but we need help, and we specifically need help around trying to get to that $4 million figure, which is a lot of groundwork. It's a lot of utilities. It's pretty basic stuff. It's pushing dirt around and putting electrical lines in and things like that. But that's what we're looking at. And I'd be glad if you have questions, glad to answer any of those.
Do the RVs need to be working RVs? Are you?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't put firm program rules around this quite yet, but I can tell you in safe parking, yes, they need to be able to get there. They need to be able to be mobile.
Yeah.
Preferably under their own power. Like we don't tow vehicles in. Sometimes we have people who have trailers, but they don't have a tow vehicle.
Gotcha.
But we currently don't accept vehicles that tires are all blown out, all that kind of thing.
What is the projected return on your paid RV parking versus your operating costs? Is it self-sustaining? Is it subsidized in a continuum?
It will depend a little bit on the rent, but it's minimal. So I think you collect rent from all those folks and you're going to get to $200,000-$300,000 at best of your operating costs. So it's a small percentage of the overall operating costs. And the cost of staffing to even collect rent increases your expense. So the idea of folks paying rent is, yes, it can help in ongoing operations to some extent, but really it's about people having skin in the game and beginning to reorient themselves to paying rent and begin to move up.
Well, and I am going to just applaud Pastor Rick's just efforts in this, because it's daunting to want to take rent, manage anything you rent, and work through all the legalese of that. But to do this on this level for people who truly need to step on the ladder and to recognize that that's one of the gaps we don't have. I think this is an exceptional program.
Yeah.
So I know that the city of Redmond is very supportive of it.
I have a question, or maybe it's a suggestion.
Yeah.
But we heard from Gary Hewitt, who's the executive director of St. Vincent de Paul of Bend, a couple of months ago. And he was telling us about his tiny home village, and that they have a model where they charge a rent kind of as well, but it's actually structured as like a shared savings account. And they have, with like the limited duration, I think there's like a year or two for the program similar to this. They actually take some of the money that is paid and use that as like here's your down payment to move out. And I think that would be like a really powerful tool, especially with the limited duration. It's like you guys could use that to like help folks save for a down payment, or you could use some of that money to help for like landlord navigation or something like that. You could pay for a staff person and be like, while you're here for the year, I will go help you find a place you can move to once you're done. I think it's really exciting. And I think like encouraging folks to have a little bit of skin in the game that'll allow you some flexible funding to help is a really good idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is awesome.
That's great. I appreciate that. Housing Works has a similar model. A lot of people save for.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Really great. Thank you for being here. That's really exciting for.
I think the request I'd have of this board is, can you help us connect to sources to help us build? We're going to be hitting up everybody we possibly can, including our state level representatives. But we will be looking for any loose change in your couches of your budgets, and we would appreciate your help if you come across funding sources that can help us.
Yeah, and keep us updated on how progress is going. And if you hit any roadblocks, reach out and let us know how we can help too. And absolutely, we'll keep you in mind.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Public comment is next. We have anyone here? Public comment? Is it you? All right, hi. Do you want to introduce yourself for those who are online?
Hi, my name is Chuck Hemingway. I'm a longtime service provider and homeless advocate here within the region. Sorry I'm late. I don't know if this has been discussed before, but I want to kind of lay it on the record as such, so please don't be offended. I don't know if this dog river report has been discussed by the board yet, but there are concerns about it. I believe this report was likely initiated in complete good faith. But all the service providers I've talked to believe that this dog river report is inaccurate, incomplete, and shouldn't be accepted as authoritative. For example, he says that 63% of the people come from someplace else, whereas the January 2020 pit count done by the HLC established that 65% of the people have been here for 3 years or more. The danger is that this report has now been incorporated as part of the records of the CHRO, and as such, it can take on a life of its own, and can be quoted and referred to as such, and that shouldn't be. This report, if anything, should have an asterisk to it. This report is entirely unilateral, and I would stress that this is the coordinated houseless response office. Perhaps this report can serve as a springboard to undertake a collaborative, coordinated transparent survey to provide a real and accurate picture. But so I would actually encourage the board to maybe consider that, using this as a springboard, perhaps, to find out what the real facts are. So thank you.
I should have said something at the time. That was also something I was a little concerned about it, adding it into our minutes. I understand that it was public comment, but it does give it a little bit of weight that is factual truth, just like our minutes are. So that is also a concern of mine as well.
Yeah, and just as staff acknowledging that it was like the report was not orchestrated or anything through the coordinated office. I believe it was Deschutes County Commission Chair and the Sheriff's Office had entered into the contract. And so it was included in the minutes because it was shared at the meeting and became part of the public record in that way. And wanted to, make it public because it was shared and folks had asked, some folks had asked for it to be shared. But yeah, happy to put a stamp on it or something that indicates that it's not like a product of the coordinated office.
That
or-
would be wise.
Yeah.
I think that's.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah, I'll update the posting this afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have a hand raised from Linda Muir. Linda, you should be good to go. Oh, you're muted. Any other public comment while we're waiting for Linda to get situated?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, I'm traveling right now and I'm listening to the meeting as I'm traveling. I just wanted to say thank you very much for spending so much time, Chris. Moving forward with any projects, especially with management. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you were cutting in and out a little bit.
I'm sorry. Can you hear? I think I'm in a better spot now. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Regarding the emphasis being placed on the community engagement conversation with regard to standing up some future programs like a managed camp, which I think is really necessary to our overall picture in Deschutes County. I think there's a general sense of distrust by the community. You guys have mentioned that with regard to projects that just, show up kind of, you're all working on them in the background, the different cities or whatever, but then all of a sudden the neighbors hear about it in the community hears about it in an article in the newspaper. And I think that trend that's happened over the past couple of years has raised a lot of concern in the community and also for us. So I think having a very vigorous and robust community engagement process will really help all of us get to some kind of solution that is beneficial not only for the homeless population, but for the community members as well. And the other thing I would like to say, as part of that community engagement process, I don't think it should be, and I heard it mentioned earlier in the discussion, that just, it will feel better if we think you're listening to us, but actually it's got to be more than that. It's got to be just more than lip service. It's got to be actual efforts and compromise and appearance that are the community concerns are being heard and also worked with, because you're right, not everyone's always going to be happy about these solutions, but there's a sense of partnership and collaboration between the Deschutes County and the different cities and the community that I think is really necessary in order to make the next big step forward in the homeless solution in Deschutes County. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Anybody else or online?
This is Tammy. I have some good news to bring forward really quickly, if you don't mind.
Cool. Sounds good.
So we were able, sorry?
As it sounds good.
Okay, so we were able to negotiate an additional $850,000 for our rapid rehousing goals. That would be increased by 25. However, we feel quite confident that we would be able to achieve that. So the $850,000 that is through the executive order funding. So that will obviously help with some of the initiatives also in your strategic plan. In addition to that, we are in discussions, as I mentioned to you yesterday, Chair Perkins, that we will be able to assist the city as you need to move individuals out of the current navigation center, and we will be able to use the facility that we have located the least property on 2nd and Franklin. So it will have the least disruption for the community members that are going to be to and fro. while all that work is being done. And we may be able to support the city also in funding with that. And I want to mention that for Sisters, although there's been a lot of discussion around the shelter, we are in discussions with the community with a small amount of rapid rehousing, so some units with some funding and to help with some support there. So while there may not be that one particular investment in the community, Sisters will not be without some investment, and then more to come on the horizon there. So thank you.
Great news. Thank you, Tammy. All right. If there's not anything else, any other items?
No.
I did want to just bring up again our meeting in October. I will be out of town, and I requested that maybe we could find another date unless it was too inconvenient for everybody else. It was going to be on the 19th. I will be on an airplane.
Yeah, I'm gonna work with staff to try to get a sense of everyone's calendars without death by doodle poll. So I'm gonna try to coordinate with staff to get a view of your calendars and figure out if a reschedule will work. Acknowledging that it has been tough to reschedule this in the past, so we may stick with the 19th, but we're gonna do our best to reschedule.
Appreciate it.
And with that, I think we're all good.
All right, thank you.